Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have part 2 of Justice Goes to Sea. Atticus is in for a rough time, so I hope you're ready. Merrick really had no choice but to take Atticus out to the temple. After the villagers heard everything, they were angry enough to hang the man on the spot. Now it was just the two of them, with the village rapidly shrinking in the distance. Merrick handled the tiller with practiced ease. Atticus had been on plenty of ships of all sizes, but he'd never participated in their operation. All he knew about small boats was that the best thing he could do was stay seated and out of the way. "How far is it to the island?" Merrick shrugged. "The wind is with us today. With luck, we should arrive in around 3 hours. Not more than 4, certainly. That would leave them a good 5 hours before sunset." That was a relief, as he had no desire to contact an angry spirit after dark. Do you think there's any way I might get out of this alive?" "I don't like your chances," Atticus said. That was about as optimistic as he was willing to be. Merrick whimpered and fell silent. Never one to indulge in unnecessary conversation, Atticus stared silently forward, alert for any threat. They sailed across the glass-smooth water for 2 hours, neither of them saying a word. Atticus reviewed the spell that would allow him to contact whatever had placed an enchantment on these men. It wasn't the sort of magic he used on a regular basis. In fact, he'd only cast the spell once, since his mentor in the Order taught it to him, and that was to contact the wandering spirit of a murdered woman. That conversation had gone off without a hitch. Hopefully this one would too. "You can see the island now," Merrick said. Atticus shifted and looked where Merrick pointed. The island was little more than a lump on the horizon at this distance. He could make out no details of the ruins. "How big is it?" Atticus asked. "Not very. A mile across at most. The temple is in the exact center." Atticus was about to ask another question when he sensed something approaching. He reached for his sword but didn't draw it. He wanted to establish peaceful contact. That said, he wasn't about to take no precautions. Calling on his connection to the lady, he summoned a steel-gray shield and wrapped it around the dory. That would turn aside even the most potent attacks, even from magical creatures, hopefully. "What's going on?" Merrick's voice trembled. "I'll handle it. Just keep us on course." Despite his hand shaking on the tiller, Merrick kept the boat steady. Ahead of the dory, a reddish glow appeared in the water. It rushed toward them at a ridiculous pace. No mortal creature could swim that fast. His guess was proven correct when a giant red creature covered in a shiny exoskeleton burst from the water and swung a lobster-like claw at them. The blow rattled the ship, but didn't penetrate his shield. "We've come to speak to your master," Atticus said. "Let us pass in peace." Either it didn't understand or didn't care. The monster swung a second time with an equal lack of results. A moment later, the dory was past it. The creature dove and took after them. With its speed, there was no way the fishing boat could outrun it. Maybe a binding spell would get it off their tail long enough for them to reach the island. "Halt," Atticus commanded. His spell struck home, then washed over its shell without taking hold. It had been a thin hope. The spell was designed to stop men, not monsters. Before he could think of a new plan, the red monster dove out of sight. A moment later, it slammed into the bottom of the ship, sending them flying. The dory spun 180 degrees, landing upside down, about 100 yards from the shore. Water poured through his shield, forcing Atticus to release it or drown them both. The instant he did, Merrick screamed. Atticus splashed around the dory in time to see the monster dragging him at a rapid clip toward the beach. Cursing his luck, he swam after the pair. There was no chance he might catch up in the water, but once they reached the beach, hopefully the monster would slow. A few seconds later, that hope was smashed. The creature strode out of the surf, with Merrick dangling from one claw like the catch of the day. It stomped through the edge of the jungle and out of sight a moment before Atticus could reach the beach. He drew his sword and hurried after them. Couldn't be that hard to track an 8-foot-tall humanoid lobster. In fact, he didn't need to track them at all. He knew where they were going. The growth wasn't nearly as bad when he got a little ways from the beach. Atticus brushed a thick vine out of his way and hurried after the long, wide flipper prints. The monster crushed everything in its path, including a fallen tree trunk bigger around than his leg. Just how strong was this thing? 10 minutes later, Atticus burst out of the jungle into a clearing, and there was the temple. The roof had long since fallen in, and a section of wall was little more than broken rock. At the main entrance, the lobster thing stood guard. There was no sign of Merrick. Atticus took a deep breath. He'd fought many powerful opponents over the years, but doubted he'd ever face one with the raw strength of this thing. As he closed, he murmured a spell to infuse his sword with the lady's power. The blade fairly crackled with magical energy. That shell would have to be plenty tough to stand up to a blow from his enchanted blade. 20 paces from the entrance, and the creature had still made no move to attack. It also hadn't stepped aside. "I have no quarrel with you, creature. Get out of my way and you may leave in peace." It gave no indication that it understood, much less intended to comply. "Have it your way." Atticus advanced. When he was 10 feet away, the monster reared back and swung a massive claw. He ducked the powerful if clumsy attack and slashed at the passing arm. Despite the magical enhancement, his sword glanced off its shell. The monster strode forward, swinging left and right. The blows came so slowly that Atticus had no trouble dodging. A good thing, too, since a single solid strike would kill him instantly. As he dodged, Atticus studied the passing claws. Much like an actual lobster, there were slim gaps in its shell to allow it to move. That was where he had to strike, and if he failed, he didn't know how he'd defeat this creature. He took his sword in a two-handed grip and waited. The left claw came swooping in. Atticus dodged and spun, bringing his blade down full force on the gap. It sheared through, sending the claw falling to the ground. His opponent didn't make a sound, and no blood ran from the wound. Atticus doubted he was even fighting a living creature. A scream from deeper in the temple reminded him that he didn't have time to spare, not if he wanted to save Merrick. The right claw quickly joined the left on the ground. With no weapons to threaten him, Atticus waded in, taking the creature's legs off at the knees. The remaining stub thrashed silently back and forth. He stepped around it and hurried into the temple. The tunnel beyond the entrance was choked with rubble, slowing his advance. The shout still came from deeper inside. Atticus leapt a fallen pillar and rushed into the central chamber. Merrick lay on a stone altar in the middle of the room. A ghostly apparition had its hands plunged into his chest. It looked vaguely like a woman wearing a waterlogged dress. "In the lady's name, begone from this plane, spirit." Atticus's banishment spell was no more effective than his binding spell had been earlier. His sword still had a full magical charge. Maybe it would prove more useful. He charged and slashed, severing the spirit's arms at the elbow. His sword passed through effortlessly. Merrick's rigid body went limp as the ghostly appendages dissolved. Atticus risked a glance and found the man still breathing. The ghost drifted back, and he moved to stand between it and Merrick. "You would defend this thief?" the spirit asked in a haunting, whispery voice. "In the Empire, the penalty for theft isn't death." "He and his friends defiled my temple," the spirit shrieked. "He needs to die, just as they did." The villagers were desperate and believed the temple long abandoned. Atticus cocked his head. "You said your temple. You're no angel." No angel. I was the last high priestess to serve here. The artifacts they stole were offerings to those lost at sea. The angel I served is long forgotten, slain in battle with Dagon's hordes. But I remember my duty, and I will see it done. Atticus braced himself for an attack. When they realized what they'd done, the men tried to make things right. None of them are evil. They'd made a mistake, not one they should have to die for. I'm surprised to hear a Justicar speak so strongly for a thief. I speak for the blind lady. What you're doing isn't justice, it's murder. Return to your rest, and I will make sure everyone knows to keep their distance from your temple. No thief will trouble you again." The ghost looked at him with more sadness than malice in her translucent eyes. "Have you lost anyone to the sea?" "No. My people are of the desert, not the sea. For the first 20 years of my life, I never saw more than a pond full of water at one time. Let me take him back to his family. The sea need claim no more lives today." "Will you make an offering?" the ghost asked. Atticus racked his brain. Everything he had was dedicated to the lady. He couldn't offer it to any other power. "I will." Merrick had managed to sit up on the edge of the altar. He pulled a scrimshaw medallion out of his shirt and lifted it over his head. "This was my father's. He died in a storm 10 years ago. Take it." The medallion flew to the spirit, who looked it over and sighed. "None of us meant to offend you, priestess," Merrick said. "What is your master's name? I will spread word of him to all I meet." "Elandros of the Deep, Lord of the Lost. I accept your offering and lift my spell. Leave me now that I might rest once more." The ghost faded away along with the medallion. Atticus sheathed his sword and looked at Merrick. "Can you walk?" "I'll by heaven walk out of here. Thank you for saving me, Justicar." "I think maybe you're the one that saved us both. Let me see your hand." The red marks were gone. Atticus nodded once. His work was complete here. He'd arranged to have buoys placed around the island, warning of danger. Hopefully any potential thieves would pay heed. Next time he might not be around to help. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you'd like to buy a copy of the short story you just heard, you can find a link in the description. If you enjoyed the story, please leave an offering to the algorithm by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next week, goodbye.